I was 11 when they locked me away. Not in a prison cell, but somewhere worse, a psychiatric facility where screaming meant nothing and nobody believed your truth. My father died 3 days before my arrest. They said he jumped from his office building. I knew better. Richard Kane didn't jump. He was pushed. By the time I walked free at 19, 8 years had vanished. My childhood, my teenage years, my chance at normal all stolen. The lawyer handed me a silver key and an address. Inside that safety deposit box, I found everything Dad left behind. $11 million, documents proving his innocence, and a leather journal with 6 names written in his handwriting. Beneath each name, he'd written what they'd done. The last page held a photo, Dad surrounded by these 6 people at a company celebration. His supposed friends. His murderers. I stared at their smiling faces and made a promise. They took everything from me. Now I'd take everything from them. The first name was Patricia Winters. According to Dad's journal, she'd been his business partner for 12 years. When competitors offered her money to sabotage Dad's pharmaceutical company, she didn't hesitate. She planted false documents suggesting Dad was selling confidential research to foreign governments. The accusations destroyed him before any investigation could prove otherwise. Now Patricia ran a successful consulting firm in the city, living in a penthouse paid for with blood money. I spent 2 weeks studying her routine. She attended the same yoga class every Tuesday, shopped at the same boutique every Friday, and had lunch at the same restaurant every Sunday. Creatures of habit made easy targets. I changed my appearance, dyed my hair black, wore colored contacts, adopted the name Alice Morgan. At 19, I looked different enough from the 11-year-old girl in old news photos. Nobody would recognize me. I made sure of that. I enrolled in Patricia's yoga class. On my 3rd session, I deliberately positioned my mat beside hers. "You're new," she said, stretching into downward dog. Her tone was friendly, but analyzing, like she evaluated everyone for potential use. "Just moved here," I replied, matching her smile. Starting fresh after some family troubles. The phrase, family troubles, made people stop asking questions. After class, she invited me for coffee. I accepted. Over lattes, Patricia talked about her business, her success, her philosophy about doing whatever it takes to win. "Nice people finish last," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "I learned that early." I nodded sympathetically, studying the woman who'd murdered my father's reputation and driven him to his death. She had no idea she was having coffee with his daughter. She had no idea her world was about to collapse. Patricia's consulting firm had one major client, Ashford Industries. They provided 70% of her revenue. Lose them, and her business would crumble. I researched Ashford's CEO, Vincent Ashford, and discovered something interesting. He valued loyalty above everything else. His company motto was literally trust and integrity first. Patricia had built her relationship with him on the lie that she'd exposed my father's supposed treason, protecting Ashford from a dangerous partnership. I had Dad's journal. I had proof she'd fabricated everything. But simply exposing her wouldn't satisfy me. I wanted her to lose everything slowly, the way Dad had. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in. So I created a plan that would take 3 months to execute. First, I needed to become indispensable to Patricia. I started small, offering to help with administrative tasks, then gradually taking on more responsibility. She liked having an eager assistant who worked for experience instead of payment. Within 6 weeks, Patricia trusted me with sensitive information. She bragged about her methods, how she'd sometimes stretch the truth in reports, how she'd occasionally borrow ideas from competitors and present them as her own innovations. I documented everything. Meanwhile, I created a fake identity as a journalist working on a story about corporate ethics. Using this identity, I contacted Vincent Ashford's executive assistant and requested an interview about his company's values-based approach to business partnerships. The assistant agreed to a preliminary phone conversation. During that call, I casually mentioned how impressed I was that Ashford had cut ties with Richard Kane years ago, given the serious allegations. There was silence on the other end. Then the assistant said something that changed everything. Mr. Ashford never wanted to end that partnership. He was devastated when Richard died. He believed Richard was innocent, but felt pressured by his board to distance the company from the controversy. My hands shook as I ended the call. Dad had at least one person who'd believed in him. Vincent Ashford had been forced to abandon their partnership, not chosen to. This information gave me a new angle. I spent the next week compiling a comprehensive report. It included Dad's original research documents proving his innocence, Patricia's fabricated evidence, and a timeline showing how she'd profited from Dad's destruction. I also included Patricia's recent ethical violations that I'd witnessed. Then I did something risky. I mailed the report to Vincent Ashford anonymously, with a note. Richard Kane was innocent. The woman you trust destroyed him for profit. She's doing the same to you. 3 days later, Patricia stormed into her office where I was filing documents. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Ashford canceled our contract, she said, collapsing into her chair. He said he's conducting an ethics review. Where did this come from? I played the concerned assistant perfectly. What happened? Can I help? Patricia shook her head, staring at her computer screen. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched her unravel. Ashford's cancellation triggered a domino effect. Other clients heard about the ethics review and quietly distanced themselves. Patricia's firm lost 60% of its revenue in 1 month. She started drinking at lunch, snapping at employees, making desperate calls to salvage relationships. I stayed close, pretending to be her loyal supporter. I'm going to lose everything, she told me one evening, her voice breaking. Someone sent Ashford lies about me. Lies! I met her eyes and smiled gently. The truth always comes out eventually. Something in my tone made her pause. For just a moment, I saw confusion in her face, like she was trying to remember where she'd seen me before. Then her phone rang with another client canceling, and the moment passed. But I knew I was running out of time. The next name in Dad's journal was Frederick Walsh. He'd been Dad's lawyer and closest friend. When the accusations started, Frederick had access to all of Dad's confidential files. Instead of defending him, Frederick had copied everything and sold it to Dad's competitors for $200,000. That betrayal had crushed Dad more than the accusations themselves. Frederick now worked as a corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm, respected and successful. He had a wife, 2 kids, and a reputation for integrity. I studied him for 3 weeks, looking for weaknesses. Frederick was careful, almost paranoid. He checked his car for tracking devices, varied his routes home, and never discussed sensitive matters on his phone. Getting close to him would be harder than Patricia. I needed a different approach. Frederick had one vulnerability, his ego. He published articles about legal ethics, gave lectures at universities, and positioned himself as a moral authority. That pride would be his downfall. I created a fake identity as a law student working on a thesis about legal ethics in corporate cases. Using this identity, I contacted Frederick's office and requested an interview for my research. His assistant scheduled 30 minutes the following week. I spent days preparing, studying his published articles, and memorizing details about famous ethics cases. When I arrived at his office, Frederick greeted me warmly. He loved talking about himself. Ethics, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, is about making hard choices. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one person to protect many others. I nodded, recording our conversation. Can you give me an example from your career? Frederick hesitated, then smiled. There was a case years ago. A pharmaceutical executive accused of selling research secrets. I represented him initially, but when I reviewed the evidence, I realized he was guilty. I had to withdraw. My blood turned cold, but I kept my expression neutral. That must have been difficult, I said quietly. Betraying a client's trust. Frederick frowned at my word choice. I didn't betray anyone. I followed my ethical obligations. If I'd known he was guilty from the start, I never would have taken the case. He was rewriting history, convincing himself he'd been noble instead of greedy. I pressed forward carefully. What happened to the evidence you collected while representing him? Frederick's expression shifted slightly. It was handled appropriately. Appropriately, I repeated. Does that mean you destroyed it? Or did you provide it to authorities? The question hung in the air. Frederick's eyes narrowed. That's confidential. Why are you asking about this specific case? I smiled and changed the subject, but the damage was done. Frederick was now suspicious. I thanked him for his time and left, knowing I'd planted a seed of paranoia. Over the next month, I sent Frederick anonymous messages, references to Dad's case, questions about the sold evidence, hints that someone knew the truth. Frederick started making mistakes. He became paranoid, convinced someone was investigating him. He hired a private investigator to find out who was sending the messages. The investigator found nothing because I covered my tracks carefully. Frederick's paranoia affected his work. He snapped at colleagues, double-checked every document obsessively, and started missing deadlines. His law firm noticed. Meanwhile, I'd been collecting information from Dad's old files. I found bank records showing the $200,000 payment Frederick had received, along with emails proving he'd sold Dad's confidential information. I compiled everything into a formal complaint and submitted it to the State Bar Association anonymously. The Bar Association launched an investigation. When Frederick received the notice, he had a breakdown in his office. Colleagues heard him shouting that someone was destroying him, that he'd done nothing wrong. Within 3 months, Frederick Walsh was disbarred. His career, his reputation, his identity all gone. 2 down, 4 to remain. But I was getting tired. Revenge was exhausting. Every day I wore a mask, pretending to be someone else, manipulating people and situations. Sometimes I caught my reflection and barely recognized myself. Was this what Dad would have wanted? I reread his journal, searching for guidance. On the last page, beneath the photo, he'd written something I'd missed before. To my daughter, if you're reading this, I'm gone. These people destroyed me, but I don't want them to destroy you too. This information is for your protection, not your vengeance. Please, sweetheart, let it go. Build a new life. Don't become what they are. I stared at those words for hours. Dad wanted me to walk away. But how could I? They'd stolen 8 years of my life. They'd murdered him and walked free. The rage inside me was too strong. I convinced myself that Dad just hadn't understood. If he'd known what they'd put me through, he'd want justice too. The third name was Olivia Chen. Wait, no. I need a different name. The third name was Olivia Brooks. She'd been Dad's executive assistant for 7 years. When investigators questioned her, Olivia had testified that Dad had ordered her to delete files and destroy documents. Her testimony had been crucial in building the case against him. It was also completely false. According to Dad's journal, Olivia had been offered immunity from prosecution if she cooperated. She'd chosen to save herself by condemning him. Olivia now worked as an office manager at a tech company. She changed her last name through marriage and tried to erase her past. I found her through online records and spent a week following her. She seemed happy, living a quiet suburban life with her husband and infant daughter. Watching her play with her baby in the park made me hesitate. Did she deserve to have her life destroyed? Then I remembered being 11 years old, screaming that I was innocent while they dragged me away. I got a job at Olivia's company as a temporary administrative assistant. On my second day, I was assigned to help in her department. Olivia was pleasant, professional, and completely unaware of who I was. I worked efficiently, making myself useful, waiting for the right moment. 3 weeks in, the company's HR director announced they were conducting routine background checks on all employees. Olivia's face went pale. That evening, I followed her to a bar where she met a woman who appeared to be an old friend. I sat close enough to overhear their conversation. "They're doing background checks," Olivia said, her voice strained. "What if someone finds out about my testimony? What if they realize I lied?" Her friend tried to reassure her, but Olivia was spiraling. I was 23. They threatened to charge me as an accomplice if I didn't cooperate. I didn't know what else to do. For the first time, I saw her as something other than a villain. She'd been young and scared, manipulated by prosecutors who'd needed her testimony. I struggled with what to do next. Olivia had been coerced, but she'd still destroyed Dad's life. Did her fear excuse her actions? Could I justify ruining her life when she had a baby depending on her? I spent sleepless nights wrestling with these questions. Finally, I made a decision. I wouldn't destroy Olivia completely, but she needed to face consequences. I created a document detailing her false testimony, backed up with Dad's evidence proving she'd lied. I mailed it to her home with a note. "Richard Kane was innocent. Your testimony murdered him. Tell the truth, or I'll tell it for you." 2 weeks later, Olivia submitted a formal statement to the district attorney's office recanting her testimony. She confessed to lying under pressure and provided evidence supporting Dad's innocence. The statement made local news. Olivia lost her job but avoided criminal charges. Her marriage survived, though strained. She'd live with the guilt forever, which seemed like sufficient punishment. The fourth name was Malcolm Price. He'd been Dad's main competitor in pharmaceutical research. When Dad was accused of treason, Malcolm had swooped in and acquired Dad's company for pennies. He'd stolen Dad's research, profited from his innovations, and built an empire on the ruins of Dad's reputation. Malcolm was now a billionaire, living in a mansion and frequently appearing in business magazines. Getting revenge on him would be different. He had resources, security, and powerful connections. I couldn't simply expose him or manipulate his business relationships. I needed something bigger. I spent 2 months researching Malcolm's current company. I discovered that his greatest achievement, a revolutionary cancer treatment that had made him billions, was based primarily on Dad's stolen research. Malcolm had made minor modifications and patented it under his name, but the foundational work was entirely Dad's. I had proof. Dad's original research notes, timestamped and documented, showing he developed the core concepts years before Malcolm claimed credit. I contacted a journalist who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. Using a fake identity, I provided her with all the evidence, explaining that a whistleblower wanted to expose Malcolm Price's theft of Richard Kane's research. The journalist was skeptical at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. She spent 3 months investigating, interviewing former employees, comparing research documents, and building an airtight case. Her article published in a major newspaper with a headline, "Billionaire's Cancer Cure Built on Stolen Research from Disgraced Scientist." The story exploded. Malcolm immediately denied everything, calling it a conspiracy by competitors. But the evidence was irrefutable. Dad's research notes, his patent applications filed before Malcolm's, testimony from former employees, it all pointed to systematic theft. Within days, multiple lawsuits were filed. The patent office launched an investigation. Malcolm's company stock plummeted, but Malcolm was smart. He had lawyers, PR teams, and money to fight. He launched a counteroffensive, trying to discredit the journalist and her sources. I realized I needed to hit Malcolm somewhere he couldn't defend, his personal reputation. I dug deeper into his past and found something interesting. Malcolm had a daughter about my age. Her name was Cassidy, and she was studying biomedical engineering at an elite university. According to social media, she idolized her father and wanted to follow in his footsteps. I created a fake profile and befriended Cassidy online, connecting through a university alumni group. We chatted casually about research and career goals. Eventually, I steered the conversation toward her father. "Your dad must be dealing with a lot right now," I wrote. "That article about stolen research." Cassidy defended him immediately. "Those accusations are lies. My dad would never steal anyone's work." I sent her a link to Dad's original research documents. "I'm studying this case for a class. Can you ask your dad to explain these similarities? I'm genuinely curious about his perspective." Cassidy went silent for 2 days. Then she messaged back, her tone different. "I showed those documents to my dad. He got really angry and wouldn't explain." I could tell Cassidy was starting to doubt. I sent her more evidence, piece by piece, always framing it as academic curiosity. Dad's patent applications, testimony from former employees, timeline comparisons showing Dad's work came first. "Maybe there's an explanation," I wrote. "But these similarities are remarkable." Cassidy stopped responding. I found out later through her social media that she'd confronted Malcolm directly, demanding the truth. He'd apparently admitted to building on Richard Kane's work, but insisted it was legal and ethical. Cassidy didn't believe him. She dropped out of her biomedical program and changed her major to something completely unrelated. She deleted all photos with her father from her social media. Malcolm lost more than his reputation. He lost his daughter's respect. That hurt him more than any lawsuit or financial loss. I felt a moment of guilt. Cassidy was innocent, just like I'd been. But then I remembered, Malcolm had destroyed my relationship with my father permanently. At least Cassidy still had the chance to reconcile someday. 2 names remained. Number 5 was Detective Harold Barnes. He'd led the investigation against Dad, and according to the Journal, he'd manufactured evidence and coerced witnesses to build his case. Harold had been promoted to captain after Dad's case and was now close to retirement. I studied Harold carefully. He was paranoid and experienced, trained to spot surveillance and deception. Getting close to him directly would be nearly impossible. I needed leverage, something from his past that I could use. I filed Freedom of Information requests for documents related to Dad's case. Most were denied, but I received some heavily redacted reports. In one report, I noticed something odd. An evidence log with sequential numbers that skipped from 37 to 41. 3 pieces of evidence were missing from the official record. I spent weeks tracking down people who'd worked on Dad's case. Finally, I found a retired evidence clerk who remembered Harold Barnes clearly. He was aggressive, she told me over coffee, always pushing us to process things faster, sometimes taking evidence before it was properly logged. I asked her specifically about the missing evidence numbers. She pulled out old personal notes she'd kept. Numbers 38, 39, and 40 were items that would have supported Mr. Kane's innocence. Detective Barnes said they were irrelevant and had them removed from evidence. My hands trembled. This was proof of misconduct. But it was also 15 years old, and the clerk had no official documentation, just personal notes that might not hold up in court. I needed more. I contacted other officers who'd worked with Harold, using my journalist identity. Most refused to talk, but one recently retired detective agreed to meet me anonymously. Harold was corrupt, he said bluntly. Everyone knew it, but nobody could prove it. He closed cases by any means necessary, and the department looked the other way because his statistics were impressive. He told me about other cases where Harold had likely planted evidence or coerced confessions. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to the Internal Affairs Division anonymously. Then I waited. Harold Barnes was investigated quietly for 6 months. Internal Affairs found enough evidence to confirm a pattern of misconduct. Harold was forced into early retirement without his full pension. The department quietly reopened several of his old cases, including Dad's. Within a year, Dad's conviction was posthumously overturned. The city issued a formal apology and a financial settlement. I donated the money to organizations supporting wrongfully convicted people. Seeing Dad's name cleared felt like a weight lifting from my chest. But it also felt empty. He wasn't here to experience his vindication. He died believing the world thought he was a traitor. One name remained, the 6th and final person on Dad's list. This one was different from the others. This one had been personal. Veronica Kane. My mother. According to Dad's journal, she'd been having an affair with Malcolm Price. When the accusations started, she'd abandoned Dad immediately, filed for divorce, and testified against him in the custody hearing. She claimed Dad was unstable and dangerous, ensuring I was placed in psychiatric care instead of with him. I hadn't seen my mother since I was 11. She'd never visited me during those 8 years. Never called, never wrote. As far as I knew, she'd moved away and started a new life, erasing me and Dad completely. Finding her took weeks. She changed her name back to her maiden name, relocated to another state, and remarried. She worked as a real estate agent and had 2 more children, half-siblings I'd never met. I drove to her town and watched her from a distance. She looked happy, laughing with her new family, attending her kids' soccer games, living the life she should have lived with me. The rage I felt was different from what I'd felt toward the others. This was deeper, more personal. She was supposed to love me. She was supposed to protect me. Instead, she'd thrown me away like garbage. I spent days planning my revenge. I could expose her affair, ruin her new marriage, destroy her reputation in her community. But one evening, I saw something that stopped me. I watched her playing with her youngest child, a girl about 7 years old. The girl had fallen and scraped her knee. My mother picked her up, kissed her forehead, and comforted her with such tenderness. I realized something that hurt more than all the betrayal. My mother was capable of love. She just hadn't loved me. She'd chosen Malcolm Price over Dad. She'd chosen her freedom over fighting for me. She'd chosen her new family over her old one. Destroying her life wouldn't change any of that. It wouldn't make her love me retroactively. It would just prove I'd become as ruthless and heartless as the people who'd destroyed Dad. I thought about Dad's last message in his journal, begging me not to seek vengeance. I finally understood what he'd meant. Revenge wouldn't heal me. It would just perpetuate the cycle of destruction. I'd already taken down 5 people. Some deserved it completely, others less so. But none of it had brought Dad back or given me peace. I drove home and burned Dad's journal. I watched the pages curl and blacken, the names disappearing in smoke. Then I opened a bank account and set up a scholarship fund in Dad's name for children who'd been wrongfully convicted. I used the money he'd left me to help others avoid the fate I'd suffered. I started therapy, working through the trauma and anger that had consumed me for so long. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. Patricia lost her business, but eventually found work at a smaller firm. Frederick was disbarred but became a consultant helping lawyers avoid ethical violations. Olivia lived with her guilt, but was raising her daughter with more integrity. Malcolm faced multiple lawsuits but used his remaining wealth to fund legitimate cancer research. Harold lost his reputation but couldn't face what he'd done. I heard he drank himself to death 2 years later. As for my mother, I never contacted her. Some betrayals run too deep for revenge or forgiveness. I simply let her go. Years later, someone asked me if I regretted seeking revenge. I thought carefully before answering. The revenge hadn't healed me, but it had given me something, proof that the people who destroyed Dad hadn't gotten away with it completely. They'd face consequences, even if those consequences couldn't undo the past. No, I finally said. I don't regret it, but I'm glad I stopped when I did. Because the truest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's refusing to let them destroy you. And I'm still here, still fighting, still alive. That's the victory Dad would have wanted. That's the revenge that actually matters.